Prince, well, the former Prince Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. He skulked off to the Royal Lodge under the cover of darkness to start his exile, all whilst Mandelson is facing legal threats. How much cover-up is going on with the establishment? Well, let's talk particularly on Andrew. We'll talk to Isabel Oakeshott shortly. Rupert Bell is with us, Talk's royal correspondent. It's interesting, Rupert, it seems only like 5 minutes ago when you and I were talking, we were asking the question, can Prince Andrew survive? That's long gone now. That ship has well and truly sailed multiple times, and he may have been stripped of his title. He may no longer have quite the home he used to have, although I'm pretty sure the new one's a bit tasty too. But it still gets worse for him.
Yes, and all these revelations just end up we get resigned almost to it. Here we go again. What is that? What is it being alleged? I mean, it just beggars belief, some of the latest allegations coming out from the release of this latest tranche of Epstein files. And you almost feel that we saw pictures of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor in Windsor Great Park on Monday, sort of looking as if it was business as usual, waving at passers-by as he drove, and he was riding his horse. And you almost get the feeling that perhaps the king has said, get out, we do not need to see photographs of you looking as if you haven't got a care in the world, and get up to Norfolk. It's as simple as that. And I think really they're exasperated, even to the extent that you've got Prince Edward, when asked when he's in the UAE, he said, was defending, we've got to think of the victims of this. So he was slightly, you almost feel, hanging Andrew out to dry here. I think the royal family are at their wits' end. Yeah. They knew why he was stripped of his title, that was more going to come out, and they sort of tried to grab the situation. But actually, it just seems to be getting worse, not only for him, but for his ex-wife as well.
Well, indeed. I mean, his ex-wife, I mean, that's it. I said earlier, if it wasn't connected to this horrendous creature called Epstein, it would just be funny. I mean, she looked any way she could make a swift quid. She was there, wasn't she, with the begging bowl? Didn't matter. She would do anything, for a bit of extra. Oh, Jeffrey, the older brother I never had. I want to marry you. And I know she was sort of joking or whatever, but it was just all a bit weird. On the Andrew stuff, some have said, look, this has been the royals for centuries. They bed hop, they play around, they do this. And it might not have been in an era previously when we had social media or 24-hour news channels. What Andrew's doing is nothing new.
Well, OK, I suppose you might be thinking Edward VII, back in the Victorian era. I mean, how many children did he possibly sire? He was, it was the royal family and sort of aristocracy and royal families having affairs seemed to be de rigueur. But I think it's the unseemly nature of this and around Jeffrey Epstein that has put this in a new level. Of course, it was all hushed up back in the day. There wasn't the social media, there wasn't the prying, there was a sort of deference. Well, those days are long gone. And Andrew's, by his arrogance, has causing a lot of anguish, I'm sure, for his elder brother and other members of the royal family, wondering, how could he behave like this? Why did he think this was a good thing? And then when you think back to that Newsnight interview, that just seems to have been an hour, if you believe the latest allegations, of complete and utter hogwash. Yeah. Because everything seems to be going... everything seems to be new. It's sort of uncharted territory. Not only what he's doing, they both look needy in their way. They're sort of clawing and clutching at Jeffrey Epstein's friendship. Yeah. I mean, he was a devious arch manipulator, if you believe everything. And Andrew and Sarah Ferguson absolutely fell for it, hook, line and sinker.
Indeed. Just a final question on this. Is he likely to, as J.D. Vance has said, nip over to the States and give some kind of evidence on this? I think I know the answer, Rupert, but what do you say?
I say no, but I wonder whether the Metropolitan Police might want to be looking at something happened here. But let's remember, Andrew has denied absolutely everything that's been thrown at him. Yeah. But then the big question is, why did he give Virginia Giuffre $12 million if he was that innocent person.
That will always be the hanging question, of course. Rupert, thank you as ever. Rupert Bell Talks royal correspondent. We're talking about the British establishment. Is it inherently corrupt? Is it just a handful of individuals through the generations that throw up these curious, sometimes jaw-dropping, often horrific, as we've seen with this? Or is it something bigger than just individuals? Does it weave its way through all of our systems? Let's have a reminder of some of our not-so-great moments over the years.
I wish I'd had the opportunity to remind him of the circumstances of my relationship, my friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, and how I came to write the emails in the first place.
Hospitals have rules with patients and things like that. Well, because I'm dyslexic when I want to be. I don't understand rules.
Rotherham, October 2011. 21 laptops containing grooming gang records mysteriously vanish from the Children's Services headquarters.
Because he was with such status, with who he was, a BBC presenter, he had such power. I feel like I had to listen to him because he was Hugh Edwards.
Good morning and welcome. More awful stories of MPs' expenses dodges today.
It was wrong, quite profoundly wrong, that the police changed the records of what happened and tried to blame the fans.
The BBC understands there will be no charges in the Cash for Honours inquiry.
This man has done more to divide this nation than anybody else. He's looked after his own pocket. I still refer to him as Dodgy Dave.
Still miss Dennis Skinner a little bit. You heard there, Mandelson, Savile, grooming gangs, Hugh Edwards, MP's expenses, Hillsborough, Cash for Honours. Let's speak with Isabel Oakeshott, Talks International editor. You've been around the journalistic block for a few years now. Isabel, I say that kindly, of course. And of course, these stories come and go. They are big. This current one, I think, seems to be, perhaps in many respects, in political terms, one of the biggest we've seen for many, many years, if not decades.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I felt quite old looking at that loop of scandals, because I do remember, in particular, I was a fairly, all things being relative, young reporter on that Cash for Honours scandal, which engulfed the Blair-Brown government in, I think it was about sort of 2000 and, I don't know, 7 or 8 or 9, something like that. And, with each of these scandals, you think, can there be a bigger one? And then another one just comes along. And I think the question you're asking is there something wrong with us as a country, that we have these sort of enormous blow-ups like this? And actually, I'm going to be a bit counterintuitive and say that in many ways, it's something right about our country that we keep exposing what are generally, yes, they're awful stories, but they are not the level of endemic corruption that you see in many other countries. I mean, look at the money that sloshes around American politics, the money that senators are able to make on the back of their rolls. Our MPs, our parliamentarians, can't make an extra few quid without there being some kind of, ministerial questions about their integrity and standards of inquiries and so on. And that's a good thing. We are very, very, we're very rigid in our application of rules about propriety in public office in the UK. If you look at global rankings, just with my international editor hat on, the UK still ranks really well in terms of its global reputation for integrity, for lack of bribery. I mean, it's not a thing, is it, in the UK? Not one that we're aware of, that people who want things can just pay massive backhanders to get them, whereas that is absolutely integral to the political culture of even some EU member states.
True.
We're not necessarily talking parts of Africa, just parts of Africa. It's also certain EU member states. So I don't think we do too badly, but, and it's a big but, there is this establishment, and I never quite knew what that meant really, but I think when you look at something like Davos, you sort of see the establishment on the global elite on parade, and all the characters that have been drawn into this absolute Epstein catastrophe are the type of people that would also gather at that meeting of the World Economic Forum every year and various other annual shindigs. And these are global elites who, by virtue of their position and wealth, tend to know each other, or if they don't know each other directly, it's only one phone call away to get to know to reach the other person. Yeah. And they look after each other. And I'm not sure whether that should be of a surprise to anybody, but when we see it in full kind of technicolor and we see how it can corrupt processes, that's when voters think, well, hang on a minute here, I'm just trying to earn a crust. Yeah. You guys are lording it around, having your emails about your parties, and meanwhile you're sort of deciding whether you're going to tax us at 35% or 50%, and you guys are just having a good time here.
I think what's interesting about the Mandelson one, and he's been around. You will have met him several times through your work as a political journalist. I bumped into him a few times. I remember going to one of those press gallery lunch things where somebody comes in. You were possibly even there, Isabel, at the time. Mandelson was the guest speaker, and he's obviously very good at that kind of stuff. He's commanding. He's very funny, quite a mesmeric character. But of course, his whole shtick was that, he knew how to operate. That was the point. But the one thing he didn't know how to operate was himself, as it turns out, because what he was doing, it seems, wasn't really about personal gain in the conventional sense. He was hooked and high on power. And the Epstein thing, it seems to me, he thought he'd hit the jackpot by being mates with this guy. This guy was above governments. This guy was in the next stratosphere of power and influence, and Mandelson was part of his inner circle, or so he thought. And that's curious, because that's really about ego, not necessarily about specific greed or money.
Well, it's also about good times, isn't it? Those guys, in their own sordid way, a way of which the rest of us feel utterly repulsed, were having a really good time in their fancy properties with their beautiful people and their unseemly, sordid and in fact illegal ways. They were having a great laugh, weren't they? We see that in the emails, come on over for a party. Yeah. And you say that Mandelson wasn't doing it to feather his own nest. Well, I'm actually not so sure about that.
Well, no, I think he was, but in a kind of different sort of way from some of the examples we've been talking about. Here.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of money involved here at various steps of the way. I mean, Peter Mandelson has been either at the front line of public life or operating in these circles at the highest level for 2 decades. And on the way through, he has got stupendously rich. Now, he's not a billionaire. I don't know how much he's worth. But how was all that money accrued? I'm not meaning to say that he's broken the law in the way that money was accrued, but I think access to the super rich, that intersection of super wealth and politics, gives you an awful lot of possibilities to make an awful lot of money.
Yeah, spot on. Isabel, great to have you on with us. Good to see you as well. Thank you. Isabel, Oakeshott Talks international editor. Dan in Kent says, we all know politicians like throwing each other under the bus, but Labour have literally put Mandy up against the wall and shot him. Fair play, can't argue. On the question of Starmer's judgment, I think 15 U-turns in 18 months rather answers that. It's a fair point, Dan. Yeah, it's kind of, it will always come down. I don't think we'll ever know, by the way, what did Starmer know. He was told we were given assurances. Maybe he was. Did the security services have any kind of inkling about... I mean, bearing in mind the last lot of emails only came out, last weekend. So I'm not going to blame Starmer for not knowing about that. But was he aware at all that Mandelson had kept a friendship up with a guy after he'd been to jail and even stayed at his house while he was in jail? He knew nothing about that? Nothing at all? I mean, if he didn't know anything at all, OK, Keir, sorry to bother you, mate. I'm struggling with that, are you?